This episode is supported by the American Resource Center, or the ARC. ARC is the first American space of its kind in Europe, and it exists for one reason: to connect Serbian talent with American opportunity. Whether you're 15 or 35, building in tech, entrepreneurship, AI, or creative industries, ARC gives you direct access to programs, mentorship, and networks that used to require a plane ticket to Silicon Valley. It's not just a space, it's a bridge, and all programs are free, and you can find them at Ložionica in Belgrade, and you can start building your path beyond borders.
If you're a startup founder from the Balkans, you'll eventually need a US company to sell into the US market, use Stripe, or raise VC money. But here's the problem. US lawyers charge between $600 and $1,000 an hour. Opening a bank account as a non-resident is a nightmare. You need a US phone number, operating address, and there are a lot of hidden costs plus lawyer lingo you can't understand. This is why we have partnered with Neubase. They are a team of Balkan founders who have been exactly where you are. They're 10 times cheaper than US lawyers, and they handle everything end to end, from the corporation, bank account setup, tax filings, and basically leaving you to focus on your own business. Head to neubase.co, book a free consultation, and mention Scale SE to get 10% discount off your LLC or C-Corp setup.
Today's guest is David Calabrese, and this episode is going to be different. David grew up in Philly, bounced between New York and San Francisco, and built multiple companies to 7- and 8-figure revenue. He started straight out of university with an event marketing company, found what he thought was a great strategic home to scale, only to learn the hard way that most partnerships don't work out as expected. His first company was a story of no fear and moving too slow, closing major deals on a park bench in New York City, to bumping right into the financial crisis of 2008 and facing a lot of challenges there. The last 15 years he spent working in early stage VC, helping amazing teams scale to 8-figure revenues, and he also worked with Marketo and helping that team through the Adobe acquisition, which was roughly around $5 billion. Today, David has his own startup and he volunteers with many different accelerator programs, one of which is Scale Southeast Europe, and we're going to talk about that story as well. We're not here to talk that much about all of the accomplishments that David has had, but rather David is here to talk today about sharing his systems that he has developed over many years of getting a lot of things wrong, everything from sleep to movement and diet to communication meetings and decision making. The cool part is that this doesn't stop here. He's giving us time every week to answer your questions about life, about your career, and about your startup at Scale SE Accelerator. So let's jump in. David, thank you for coming on to the podcast.
No, thanks for having me and having me in Serbia again.
Always a pleasure, man. I'd like to start off this podcast by understanding who David is. After we're going to dive into like your entrepreneurial experiences, your advice for entrepreneurs, and the systems that you use. But for now, I want to understand who was David growing up in Philly, and how did the entrepreneurial mindset kick in for you?
So I grew up outside of Philadelphia. When I read that, when you shared it, I appreciate you sharing the questions in advance. When I read this, I said, I think I can get through this without getting emotional. I think we're all shaped. There's a line from one of the few shows I watch, and basically it's just two titans. One's an attorney general, the other is in finance. And basically one says, you are who you are before the times you can remember. And I think there are many things I remember about growing up, but I would say that over time, just the experiences that I had really shaped me as a human. And the best way to describe it is grateful for growing up in an area where I was exposed to everything. Lived in a nice house, went to a decent school. But what started to shape me early on was being exposed to people who had more. So we didn't have much. I still remember, I don't know if I made this visual memory up, but I remember buying shoes for $1 at Kmart, and they weren't even sneakers. They were like track shoes, but they were on sale. And kids are kids, right? So you can't be mad at humans for being humans, and kids have no social or emotional intelligence. But I remember being young, and when we didn't have much, just constantly being made to feel like I was worth less than everybody else. and not worthless, but like worth less because I didn't have. And for me, that wasn't what I was around. I mean, my mother had nothing. She was first generation Italian, 6 of them living in a home. And when you hear them talk, it's funny to hear them talk. One of my aunts, who was basically the second mother to all of them, the oldest, she recently passed. And it was my mother and two of my other aunts, and they were talking in the hospital. And they just started reminiscing. And they talked about their childhood as if it was the most amazing thing. And they're talking about how 5 of them were in a bed in what should have been a little 2-bedroom, tiny house in South Philadelphia, plus their brother, plus, obviously their parents. And the way they talk about it is like they had everything.
Yeah.
So for me, that was so much of what she instilled in us, is like having everything has nothing to do with what you have. But then everything changed once I went out into the world. And the more I sort of tried to navigate and find my way, the people I became closest friends with were the people that didn't have anything. Because the people that didn't have much felt like, or had something, felt like they had to compete with the people that had more. And the schools that we ended up going to, because it was a rather large area, you had people in government housing and you had kids that lived in, really expensive homes, like truly wealthy. I got along with the kids in government housing because they reminded me of what my, who my mother was. Like, are you cool? Are you a good person? Do I like you? All right, we're good. Didn't matter what you have. Didn't matter what you could afford. So much of that shaped who I was. I hate bullies, in all senses of the word. I've always had, I still, I think, carry some degree of feeling like I have something to prove. And it's not even to myself at this point. If I'm being honest, it's not even to myself. It's like this constant need to prove to people who don't give a shit. And Alex Hormozy said once, he said, like, to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to have both this superiority complex and inferiority complex, both fighting in one. And I say all this to say, like, why not own it? Why not own where it comes from? Why I'm doing the things I'm doing? Why I said to you from the first time I met the entrepreneurs here, like, I don't care if I ever, and your intention in bringing all of this in was to bring people in and maybe there'd be some commercial value. Like, you always wanted more out of myself and Aaron and Chuck, like, to be potential partners. And the first time I talked to the entrepreneurs, I'm like, I don't care if I never make a penny off of any of this, because they're just really good humans and they want to learn. And that for me is when I think about my goal and the person that I work towards every day, like what shapes me, the things that I do, et cetera. It starts with that. Just like, am I doing things that matter for the people that I think need it? You asked the question about systems. Are we jumping to the next question if I jump to that one?
Yeah, I mean, so I also asked you about like, where did the entrepreneurial drive come from, and did you have like any entrepreneurial projects when you were young?
Where did it come from? Honestly, my mother would say she likes to tell stories, and her and I are very close. Maybe it's typical Italian mother, Italian son thing. But she tells stories about, like, me being in the hospital and the nurse saying, that kid is going to be a handful. He knows exactly what he wants and he won't accept anything less. And she tells me about how I didn't like authority at a young age for the sake of authority. So she would tell me things and my response would be, you're not the boss of me. Like, most people's earliest words are probably like mom, dad, and mine were like, you're not the boss. So part of it, and you realize this, and I think in working with me, is that I hate's a strong word, but it's how I feel. Because it's not like I don't hate, but I everything against me, everything in me resists the idea of making decisions because of your title, your ego, your whatever. The right thing to do is the right thing to do. And being out in the world and realizing that a lot of people maybe they either don't think that way, or just they haven't connected the ability to leave their ego behind and recognize that there's someone sitting in front of them saying, here's some data that says there's a better way. Over time, I realized I don't really think I'm suited to work for other people. And I don't know that it was necessarily entrepreneurial by nature, but kind of no fear, just enjoyed doing things, had no problem just picking up and working on something without any experience. I don't know where that comes from. But from when I remember, like at university and even before starting the company, it was like people, if there was something that needed to be done, I would just do it. It was like, oh, we're thinking about doing this event. We're thinking about doing this party. We're thinking about, hosting this conference. We're thinking about whatever. Like, okay. And I would just start doing it. So I think it's always part of me, and combination of work ethic and just liking sort of the work and the outcome at the same time. So I don't know that there was a moment. It just kind of happened, right? Combination of strong and difficult personality and the enjoying the combination of the work, putting in work and seeing the outcomes.
You are a systems guy, and you basically say that you have systems for most of the decisions that you make in your life, and it can be anywhere from dieting to speaking with somebody to decision making. Talk to us, like, why is implementing systems in our everyday business and personal life important? And what was the key moment or situation in your personal or business life where it clicked and you were like, if I only had that one system or a set of systems, I could have done better. I could have made more or not failed at that one thing.
Okay, so in hindsight, and I forget the saying, but there's something like all data is obvious in hindsight. So I could tell you the moments where not having systems blew things up. But I didn't know coming out of that I needed a system not to blow it up. Like, I recognized that I blew it up and I needed to do something differently. But I didn't truly start to think about systems until I moved to San Francisco. Mainly because, like, growing up on the East Coast, spending most of my time between Philadelphia and New York, there isn't a whole lot of open communication. It's just like one foot in front of the other, suck it up, walk on the fire, do what you need to do. Like, it's just that grind mentality. In San Francisco, there was such just like openness and self-improvement, and people were just out front with who they were, right? If they had a flaw, it would show up in a meeting. And I don't know if they didn't have control or didn't care, but you also weren't judged for it. Like, oh, they're having a bad day or whatever, that just started me on the journey of learning. And by consuming more and more and being around people who were so open, I really started to work on myself, because I knew the way I was doing things wasn't going to work. And I'm not going to get into all the details here. I will eventually. And when I do eventually, everyone will know why I didn't prior to the eventually, get into full details. But I struggled for a long time making decisions out of, it wasn't fear. It wasn't emotion. It wasn't pride. Just, I don't even know how to describe it. Just the wrong decisions. The example would be one of the things I've talked to you about, which is maybe what you're trying to get to here as well, is my first software company did all the right things until I did the wrong things. So I had an idea, and the whole idea was, I knew from the first company I worked on that there were companies that spent a ton of money on media data to make decisions. I also knew that the small businesses didn't have it, because these were expensive, like complex software programs, and really expensive. So I found the one company that had all the data I needed, negotiated an exclusive deal. The first meeting was on a park bench in New York City with a business card I had printed up an hour before. Like, no fear, showed up, I'll figure it out, had the conversations. I then proceeded to take way too long to launch the product. That's why when I talk to people about go faster, make it smaller, it took way too long, and financial crisis. You never know when the shoe's going to drop. So everything we did, a product that worked, SEO, which I can't take credit for, the long tail SEO, I did all the research, but a friend of mine, Alex, who's had wonderful success since then, like, he's the idea of the co-founder you want. In that moment, like, he saw the research and knew everything that I was doing. He just came back. He wasn't even part of the company. Like, we would help each other with our ideas. He came back and built this entire script to be able to create thousands of long tail SEO pages, and they started working right away. I knew what I needed to create, but I was an engineer. I didn't know how to build it. He just did. Like, I was going to do it. We were talking to a company. He just built it. So everything was working in the financial crisis. But right before that, things were working. We created a demo. We had this big pitch between the company and American Express. And what we were building, everyone at the table realized this is like a 9-figure annual revenue opportunity for them, not for us. For us, it was meaningful, but for them, it was pretty quick because 2 big companies with the product we'd offer make a ton of money. So I was invited up for a meeting in New York. I didn't know it was an acquisition meeting until I said something that came out of, like, I said something and I realized in the back of my head, I'm like, oh shit. So they were just talking about the business and the valuation. And I just started rambling. Like I was just talking like, well, being honest, this is how much money we've raised. And we raised it at this valuation. And, we're still really early. There's so much we haven't proven yet. So, how much we're worth. I am completely negotiating. All I had to do was shut up. That's all I had to do was just stop talking. But I went in unprepared, right? I went in unprepared. I didn't have a system. I had no idea. I had no idea why I was there. And to be fair, the reason I had no idea why I was there because I didn't take the time to analyze the conversation. So over time, the self-improvement and then looking back at those you idiot moments, like speaking to myself, I realized I need to put systems in place for decision-making, for preparation for meetings. What are the 4 or 5 paths that can go down? I want to have responses, even if sometimes that response is, I can't answer that question now, but I know how to get it, right? Just being honest. And that was really it. And then one of the big ones, like the decisions to be made, et cetera, is when you're running a company, even in life, you often get to a point where you feel like you have to make 100 life-changing decisions per day. That's overwhelming. For anybody, it's overwhelming. So what do you end up doing? You either just get paralyzed, you make 100 really bad decisions, right? So you do nothing, you make lots of bad decisions. So the only way to do is have a system to prioritize, take off the plate what you need to now, and then let the other things that are, potential later or never decisions come later or never. And it just evolved over time. So little by little, for me, it's just, where am I making mistakes? How do I put a process in place that I can rely on? So no matter how I feel, no matter where my head is, no matter how bad of a day I've had, I know exactly what I can lean on. And that's so much of what it became for me, is it just became something I could trust when I wasn't my perfect self, which for most humans is like 90% of the day, right? With everything we need to deal with.
All right, so let's dive in deeper to those systems. So you mentioned one is DTBM PTBS, or decision to be made, problem to be solved. I've had the pleasure of of hearing that abbreviation quite a lot this year. How do you use decision to be made and problem to be solved system in your everyday life or in business?
For me, it's simple in that everything in life really comes down to a decision to be made or a problem to be solved. Like, should I launch this? Should I not launch this? What program? Should I marry this girl? Should I not marry this girl? Like, should I take this job, not take this job? Should I ask for a raise? Whatever it is, like, it's all a problem or a decision. But if we leave it in our head, 2 things happen. We're not making a decision on data. It's all emotional. And then we revisit it 1,000 times. So for me, it's really simple. It's like the more you define it, and I don't take credit for this because it's been said, I don't know who said it first, but the more you define the problem or the decision you need to make, the closer you are actually to making the decision or solving the problem. So you really define it well. You identify the questions that need to be answered, which is just data, right? So if I need to make this decision, no matter what it is, should I fundraise? How much? What are the questions you need to ask? What are the questions you need to answer? How much money do I think I need? Well, what am I going to do with it? Where's it going to get me? How many people am I going to hire? What product features am I going to launch? How am I going to market those? How much money do I generate? So I've got to answer all these questions. Now I've got a clear answer. If not, how much money should I raise? Crickets. $1 million, 2 million, 5 million? How many people walked into a meeting and then they're asked, like, where does the money go? And you see the pie chart that every investor hates. Well, it's 30% to marketing and 70% to... And you look at it, it's like, but where does it actually go? And all of a sudden, it's like the investor speaking Chinese and you're speaking English when they actually asked you for the details. So that's where describe it, get the data, make the decision. You can always revisit it. And the reality is, whether it's hats, haircuts, and tattoos or 2-way doors, like Jeff Bezos says, I don't even remember who came up with hats, haircuts, and tattoos. Most decisions are not meant to be final. You start, you learn, you make your next decision, and you just keep cycling to get a little bit better, over time. So that's the advantage of it as well. As long as you look at each decision, like, I'm going to be partially wrong, and it's a process, it makes everything in life easier. It just gives you something to lean on when you're not really sure how to decide something, especially if you're patient with yourself and you say, I'm okay with not making the perfect decision as long as I've made the best decision I can with the information I have.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what are hats, haircuts, tattoos?
Well, I mean,
That analogy, yeah.
So it's like two-way doors. The example is, a one-way door is once you're through, you can't go back. Two-way doors, just keep walking in and out. It's like, it's a really easy thing to undo. So hat, haircut, and tattoo, you can change hats really easy. Haircut takes a little longer. Tattoo, costly and time-consuming to get it removed. The whole point is, if it's really that easy, like take a hat and switch it, just do it. Don't spend 3 days making a decision for something that you could do in 5 minutes and learn from. It doesn't make any sense. Spend the 5 minutes, learn, so the next 5 minutes you spend are better optimized. And that's really what it's about, is so many times we give everything the same weight. Every decision gets the same weight. And that's when we get paralyzed, because you're looking at 100 decisions you need to make, when the reality is you really only need to make 1 or 2 decisions. The rest of it, you just need to get some data and then figure out what the data is telling you to do.
What advice would you give a startup who's in a specific situation where they don't have enough data? They're hearing data that they need to pivot, but they're uncertain to what. And if they pivot, that pivot is going to be like 180 degrees. So in my example, when we were running our own startup, we had a B2C app that people really liked. We had data that people liked the app. Nobody was using it. So we had one data that was telling us it's good, but we had other data which was like, it's good, but it's not good enough, right? So we basically took a risk and we pivoted completely to a B2B platform focused on grocery retailers instead of shoppers in these grocery stores. And that turned out to be a pretty good decision in the end. But we wasted a lot of time in figuring out how to make that decision, what to pivot, or to just kill the company and start something new. So, and this is a decision that I think a lot of founders face. Pivoting is cool, but what happens? It's different if I pivot from one piece of paper to another piece of paper versus if I just tear the whole piece of paper apart and I start writing a book, right? So, how can startups use your system in those scenarios?
Well, the first thing is, and this is an example, I'm not going to say who the company is, but they started talking about their product. And I said, you haven't validated anything, and now you want to start marketing. And there's strong signals from the market that what you've built and the way you're positioning it, there's no fit. The best thing you could do is pretend as if you haven't built anything yet. Because when you go into the market and you try to force it to accept something you've already spent a lot of time building, that's the biggest mistake. You spend all this time, you're now sort of married to the idea. So you're trying to force the idea on the world instead of listening to the world. So you actually said conflicting information. People liked our app, but no one was using it. That means they didn't like your app, right? So
It means they didn't love it.
no, it means they didn't like it. There was no value in it. They didn't care. Like if someone says, I really like that shirt. Would you like one? No, I don't like the shirt. Right? I mean, this is the point about being honest about data and like, what is it actually telling you? So this is what I'd say is the hardest part, is that people tend to have, we're all guilty of it. I'm guilty of it too. We tend to look for, it's like information bias. We look for information or data that supports our existing position or opinion rather than just looking for the right data. So it's like, one of the things I constantly ask myself is like, what do I need to know? What needs to be true? What needs to be true for this to be a successful business? So the example would be, what needs to be true for this shopping application to be a successful business? Well, first, sure, eventually we've got lots of people that are using it. We have to get people to install the application, walk into a store. I'm making up what your user experience was. Walk into a store, scan the product, add it to their phone and their cart, and then use the phone to pay and check out and then leave the store.
That was exactly what the app was about.
Okay.
Plus, you had like a 2D map where you could find specific items.
Great.
But yeah.
So we need someone to use our app to do these 5 things for us to confirm that not only is it a good potential product, but it's a good potential business. And if people aren't doing any one of those things, you start to understand why. What's the friction? Nobody's installing the app. Okay, well, they don't know that it exists. How do you eliminate that friction point? Stand outside of the grocery store and hand out flyers. Give people like a, hey, we're going to give you a discount. We give you a 20% off, like whatever it is, get them to install the app. Because if the installation of the app is the problem, there are methods to get over that. That's not necessarily the first problem you need to solve with something like this. You need to solve the rest of it. The rest of it being they use the app to navigate the store, they navigate the store to a product, they scan the product, add it to a cart, and they check out. So from there, you're identifying where does it fail each step along the way if it's failing. If you're getting all the way to the checkout and people don't check out, like they add it to a cart, but they don't check out, then the question becomes, then it's why. That's where you're having the conversations. One of the things you've talked about here is why so many things are still done in cash is people don't necessarily trust some of the financial systems, the payment systems. So that's when you have to ask yourself a question. Am I trying to solve a problem I can't solve? Is there a friction point I can't solve or I don't have enough time to solve? Yep. So when you're pivoting, the more, if you've noticed, I didn't talk about the pivot. I didn't talk about any of it. What I talked about is just gather data, get people to use it, see where they fall off. Can you solve it? Try to solve it. And at a certain point, you have to ask yourself the honest question. Have I done everything in my control to solve the problem in the way that it can be solved? And if at a certain point, the answer to those things is yes, what needs to be true isn't true. What needs to be true is that people will purchase and check out. If that is not true and you've done everything else to get to that point, kill it. Kill it or pivot. Like pivot to something else, and maybe there's data that says pivot. So that's why for me, the system is important because it eliminates the emotion. I'm not committed to this idea. I'm not married to how much money and time I've already put out. I'm focused on the time in front of me versus the time behind me. Because I'm still guilty of this. Like I get into something and I love diving into data and I get obsessed with it. And I pick my head up 6 hours later. I don't do it as much anymore, but I'm still guilty of it occasionally. Like what needed to be done could have been done in 20 minutes. I just spent 6 hours down a rabbit hole, which completely skewed my decision-making. So much of it is like, make it simpler, learn, remove the friction. What needs to be true today, I need to get 1 person to check out, then 2, then 3, then 4. Are enough people that I get to install the app making it all the way through? Once the answer is yes, then you solve the distribution problem. If you've got something people love, then you distribute. So many times people talk about marketing, but they haven't validated. The good thing now is you can validate most of these experiences, not necessarily the checkout, but you can at least evaluate and validate the experience just by creating content online as if it already exists and see if people get all the way to the point where they're willing to install it. If they know all the things it's supposed to do for them and enough people go into the funnel and are willing to convert, you've got validation. And I don't take credit for this. I learned this from Roy Rosen. He gave a speech years ago, and he was I don't remember his exact title, but he was senior leadership at Intuit. And he talked about Weber tests, and that's how they identify QuickBooks. And it was the first time I had ever heard of it. And I just thought, well, this is brilliant. Like why? And it was so critical at that time because the cost of infrastructure and engineering, you're talking about millions or tens of millions of dollars in 2 years. You needed to test before you build. Why wouldn't you do that even if it's only $50,000 in 6 months? Like, why not save yourself the $50,000 in 6 months if you can?
Yep. Thank you. So basically just gathering all of the positive and the negative data and trying to and kind of combining that to see what makes sense as the next step and figuring out what is the easiest and fastest next step that's going to get you more data to making that final decision in the end, which can be a tattoo or not, right?
Well, I mean, for me, the framework that I always use for myself is like what needs to be true. First principle, what needs to be true for this to succeed? Like, what's the thing that has to be true? Sure, people have to install it, but then like, okay, what needs to be true for this to be a successful business is someone has to do these 5 things. Okay, which one is most important for me to prove now? Mission critical. If I can't solve this, the rest doesn't matter. Distribution doesn't matter if I can't get people to check out. So then you start working through one problem at a time. Install, navigate, scan, add to cart, checkout. And you start to see where people are dropping off and identify through conversations, through feedback, is it a problem you can solve? So what needs to be true? What's needs to be true, mission critical for this thing to succeed? It's not distribution. It's that 5 people love your product. 5 people want to use it. We'll use it over and over and over again. And you keep going until you are unable to solve one of those, whether it's 3, 5, or 10. It shouldn't be more than, ideally just a few in the beginning. And one of those key points of failure in the product, if you can't solve it, it's time to move on. Like, don't spend 6 months building something only to find out you can't actually solve one of the key steps in the process that needs to be resolved to reach the end goal of they check out.
Yep. Okay. You also have a system that's called dollar hour and QTBAD, or question to be answered. Talk to us about those, and what are like the 1 or 2 main questions that every founder should have an answer to before they walk in any room, especially when they walk into a room with an investor or with an advisor like yourself.
Well, I mean, for me, every person is different, right? It's like the way I think, the way I do things is going to be different than someone else, the way you want to communicate. If you're communicating with someone who's an angel investor and they're doing it because they want to give back, your pitch to them is going to be very different than if you're dealing with a major venture fund, right? It's just completely different. So questions to be answered, I'll get to that one in a second. Like dollar hour, for me, it's a simple reminder of that we live in a world of experiments. Nothing we do is right. The first thing you say, you're now engaged, congratulations. I mean, it's just not yesterday. But my point is, how many times as a young guy when you were trying to date and figure things, how many times was the first thing out of your mouth the wrong thing? It was a series of experiments, right? You figured it out, right? But that's all of us, right? And I'm making it personal and silly because everything in life is that. Like, no one comes out knowing how to drive a car, ride a bike. We don't know not to cross the street until either we're told not to or we almost get hit by a car. Everything in life is just like we get data and we get a little bit better at reducing risk and achieving our goals. So dollar hour is really simple. What am I going to do in the next hour? What am I going to do with the next dollar so that the next hour I spend, the next dollar I spend is getting me closer to my goal, is better spent. How do I spend the next block of time or capital to ensure the block of time and capital after that is spent better, like 1%. For me, dollar hours, like just what I remember, it's a better framework for me than 1%, but people who say like 1% better every day, it's the same theory. Same theory. Right, just basically operating experiments, like what am I learning that's going to make me better with whatever I do next? And then questions to be answered for me, that is leaning in with extreme empathy. The point there is, it's not about the questions I need to go in and ask. It's about what are all the questions you're going to have for me? And I use this in everything. If somebody's going to a website, when I'm designing UX, which I actually like the design part, I'm terrible at it, but I like the UX side because I get to dive into problem solving. I build out a really detailed cohort. Who is this person? What have they tried? Why did it work? Why didn't it work? And when they show up, what I'm thinking is like, what are the 20 questions they're going to be asking my website to answer? Should I trust you? How much is it going to cost? How does it work? Does it work with my tech stack? Does it require technical skills internally? All the things that I need that these people are asking without actually verbalizing. I make sure that all those questions are answered and answered in a sequence that makes sense to the user in terms of priorities. Now, I'm going to inevitably get some of the responses, an order of responses wrong, but if I start there, I at least know I have a good framework to make sure if there are 7 things that you need to know, questions that you need to be answered when you show up on my website, I've got those answered. With investors, it's the same thing. It's the reason why the use of funds working backwards for me is the most important thing, because what you're doing when you're asking an investor for money is saying, I need you to give me capital to achieve these things. Well, if you can't explain those things and how you're going to accomplish those things, what you're really doing is like, give me some money so I can 4-letter word around for the next, year on your capital and pretend to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and invest 30% in marketing, 40% in software development.
And that's the thing. It's like, for me, the example I give people is a project I'm working on, and I always feel like we're close. And I want to give this, Milan and Petra credit, because I mean, their willingness to walk on, just fire and glass so long, and we've been doing it together, is the only reason we're here. And we feel like we're getting like almost there. But the reality of it is, when I think about pitching this business, when I talk about the money slide, you got to convince people this is exciting. It's big. It's going to impact and change the world. For me, the money slide is 1 round, 2 sprints to escape velocity. So what I'm saying to the investor is, the money we're raising now in 2 sprints gets us to escape velocity. Now I back into it. This is what escape velocity means. This is what happens in basically the 4th sprint at the end. This is what we accomplish in sprints 2 and 3, and exactly how we do it. Where every dollar goes, the people we need to hire, the marketing we're going to execute, every single piece is defined. Then there's the prior to sprints. Basically, in this, you've got 4 columns. What we did, the 2 sprints, and then what happens in escape velocity. What we did is all the things that I've done, so I know exactly where the money goes in those 2 sprints. I'm not guessing. We ran these campaigns. We learned these things. Our CAC is $11. Our break-even point is, 3 months, 2 days, whatever it might be. We ran, this in terms of infrastructure. To get to these points, we need to increase by 3,000% our overall cost and implement, these data and security measures, blah, 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 blah. I did all of these things. That is how I know that with this round of capital, in these 2 sprints, and this capital allocated exactly this way, here's where I'm going to be. Now, that doesn't, if you think about what I just said, you might say, well, David, sounds like it's a series A, B, C company, and series A and B means something very different depending on the country and even the city you're in. But the point is, if you're raising with an idea, even then there's a bigger expectation now. The expectation is like, what have you validated? There's no reason not to validate something. I ran a campaign, or I ran this content for 3 months with ManyChat and these flows, these vapor tests, and each one of them got 50,000 views. This one got 400,000 views and converted at this percent. We know people want the value proposition. We have X number of people in our beta. Here's how much we're raising, and this is where it goes. And it builds us this, internal or commercial alpha, or whatever you think you need to release based on the industry. And with that, once we go through that first round of product feedback, user feedback with these users, we know exactly what we need to build next. By the way, we've already validated how to market to them. Now it's about making sure that the people who raised their hand and said, we want this, they love it. So we know the next round of people will love it too. So it's a little bit of time making sure they love it. Then we get back to distribution. That tells a story that you did the work. Not like, hey, I've got an idea. There's no excuse for I have an idea anymore.
Yep. Okay. You've had a pleasure of working with a lot of founders in the last 15, 20 years. You've mentored startups from Andreessen Horowitz, from Dream Adventures, from University Science Center, and you had the pleasure of working with Scale SE founders, so founders here in the Balkans. What is the biggest mistake that most early stage founders make? And how are those mistakes different here in the Balkans that you have seen?
Well, it's like,
and what are common patterns that you saw between the founders?
Well, I love volunteering for programs like this. I mean, the Andreessen Horowitz is a volunteer program, and it's meant to help disadvantaged entrepreneurs as well, like those that don't necessarily have the same paths or access. And the biggest difference for me, which is why if you look at most of the programs I work with, I really like working with entrepreneurs who are anxious, like they're trying to fight their way out of less than ideal circumstances, or not having the same access, because they come with a different approach. The biggest issue I see here versus other places, the biggest mistake most entrepreneurs make is they overcomplicate everything. Like they overbuild, and the more they overbuild, the more they overcomplicate, the harder it is to make decisions, the harder it is and longer it is to figure out the thing that pulls the lever. And it's really, it's difficult. I'm not like, I don't have the right to judge because I still do the same thing sometimes myself. I get caught up in this, like too many things in a day, which means I'm not doing any of them well. I'm not getting the data that I need, the amount of data I need to make a good decision. So everything starts to slow down. I wouldn't say it's a mistake more than it's a habit, it's a trait, it's a muscle you need to build, right? I mean, James Clear talks about with atomic habits, like you don't build great habits overnight. And one of the examples I've said here to people oftentimes, because what I've noticed in the US is it's like people have lots of access. Even if they don't necessarily have the same access, we all have access to the same information. If you're in New York City, even if you're in like the worst part of New York City, you can still travel to the best in 15 to 20 minutes. You can still, attend one of these entrepreneurial events. Even if where you are is you're in, the projects, et cetera, you have the ability to at least potentially be exposed to it. So in some ways, I think there's two things. One, there's commonality, one, the difference. Being exposed and close to it can sometimes create a delusional sense of arrogance. Like, you think you know more than you do. To be honest, that was me when I was younger. I probably thought I knew more than I did. And I had to bump my head a few times. Here and in and I think it's similar in areas where there is extreme poverty in the US, there's a lack of self-belief, right? It's not even, it's like, I can't do that. You'll see it in social media in the US, where oftentimes people say, oh, they only achieved this because they had this, they got that, they got whatever. And what they're really communicating is, I don't know how to get where they are. I want to accomplish that. I want to build Amazon. I want to build these things, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to fight my way out. So much of it is giving people not just an example, but giving them an ecosystem of people that are fighting their way out at the same time. And that's kind of what you're trying to do with Scale SAE, is to say, look, there's a group of companies who have shown that they want to be entrepreneurs, but they also acknowledge they don't know how to be entrepreneurs. And they also, what I've noticed here is, because it's been such a service industry heavy ecosystem, the approach to entrepreneurship is still to some degree, and problem solving is just like, tell me what to do and I'll do it really, really well. But that's not entrepreneurship. The fact that you have people here, so many people who are brilliant, and if you give them something, they will do it really, really well, means there's just like this last bridge. And this last bridge is shifting the mindset, but it's not going to happen overnight. This goes to like habits and the differences, et cetera. Regardless of whether you're in the US, you think you have access, you live in projects in New York City, you're in Belgrade, and you're just like, I feel like I can achieve everything, but I have no idea how. And they don't even know the things that they're doing wrong, right? Because it's just what they've been surrounded with. The best thing you can do is move outside your comfort zone in the conversations you're having. Move outside your comfort zone in the people you're surrounding yourself with. That sounds easy in theory. So the way I do it, because I never felt so connected, not just to the world, but to where the world was going and to like my own self-improvement, as I did when I was in San Francisco. Because I was around it, every conversation, the people I'd see in the gym, on the street, at the cafe, like everything is around you 24/7. I don't know how to describe how quickly that changes you as a person. Like there's nothing to fall back to. You're constantly surrounded by what you want to fall forward into. Here, the best way to do it is pick your podcasts, like block out the noise. And we talked about it with one of the entrepreneurs, right, the other day. Masters of Scale, the First Round podcast, I think they changed the name of it. It used to be called Review. They changed it now. But every day they're interviewing entrepreneurs and going deep, and you're hearing people that have gone through these tough stories and their way of thinking and problem solving and everything else. So get rid of the rest of the noise and consume as if you're there. Build the ecosystem from a distance until you can be there. Like that's the best way to do it, is to just put yourself in that situation. Like James Clear often talks about the process of put your shoes by the door, then put your shoes in the car, then go sit in the parking lot of the gym, then walk into the gym, even if you just sit at a bench, then walk on the treadmill for 2 minutes. He's like, don't go in and try to lift 5,000 pounds. Just slowly create the different habits that lead to your end goal. And this is about being patient with yourself too, which is what he's trying to say. You don't break a bad habit overnight. So be patient and kind with yourself while you're working on it.
Yep. What else do you see in the region in terms of like cultural differences between like US founders and founders here, and specifically about failure? Because failure here is regarded differently than it is in the US. In the US, it's failure is a stepping stone to success. Here, it's kind of like people don't talk about it as much as they should, and they are ashamed or afraid to talk about their failures, or their like, oh, I had a startup and I was running it for 3 years and it failed, you know, in my example. So what's the difference in the mindset there?
The way you're trained, it's like you're trained to be robots. And I'd say that way when I was talking to someone earlier about the education system, they said in the education system, all the way through higher education, you're taught to come in and listen and not speak for 10 hours a day. It's like, you know, or however many hours a day. It's like what you're doing is you're training highly capable robots. You're not training people to think for themselves. You're not training people to be problem solvers. You're not doing any of these things, right? So when you're not doing any of these things, you're not building the muscle that's okay with failure, because failure only comes from trying things on your own. Not from being told what to do, what to think, what to study, but from trying things on your own. So here the mindset is, if this thing didn't work, I ran this marketing campaign, I'm a failure. No, you're not. No, you're not. Just the marketing campaign didn't work. I got a B on this test. Like the one girl who was at well, you know, I there was one time I didn't do well in the course and I worked to get the grade up. Like, I get it, right? You doing well in everything you do, there's nothing wrong with that. That's pride in your work, but not when it gets to the point where you're paralyzed by getting something wrong that you do nothing. And this is where changing the ecosystem and the voices that you allow into your head is different. Because if you're listening to people from, you know, the interviews on Masters of Scale, the interviews that Y Combinator hosts, the interviews from from First Round, and Andreessen Horowitz has, I mean, he's on lots of podcasts, but they also have their own. So I would definitely recommend that as well, where Mark and Ben talk. And they do get into a lot like the psychology of entrepreneurship. The reality is you have to be okay with failing, because everyone has said this. You only fail if you quit. Otherwise, you're learning. So many people here are active. They try different things. If you're an engineer, your first day, you weren't writing thousands of lines of code like, this is perfect. I don't need to debug anything. I don't care if you've been doing it for 10 years. Even with AI, there's still some debugging. There's still, you know, your code is not perfect. Something isn't fast. Like, there's always something that needs to be fixed. And that's the way they need to look at it, right? You're not failing. It's just part of the process. You start here, and every day you get a little bit better. And that's not something necessarily that happens overnight, but part of that is just telling the other people who, those voices in your head, it's just not even listening. If somebody comes into the room, it's like, you need to think, you need to put in your headphones, listen to a podcast to somebody who's not going to talk to you that way, walk out of the room. You have to stop letting the noise in. That's where it starts. And one of the things we talked about too is getting people around it more too. So like, have regular events here where people can come in, work next to other entrepreneurs, see people doing it. Because sometimes you need at least somebody who's still kind of afraid of the failure, but not so afraid they're not doing something anyway, for you to get comfortable. That's the way it works, right? It's like the example of, you know, everybody loves a party, but nobody wants to be the first one there, right? And the hardest thing is to get the second person to the party. And there's like I don't even remember what it was. Probably one of the marketing geniuses talked about this, like the first person dancing. The difference between one person dancing and 10,000 is the second person joining. As soon as the second person joins, it's no longer an individual. It feels like a small crowd. Oh, there's two. Somebody else is going to make it three. Yeah. Bring the people here. Get enough that you turn 5 and 6 into 10 and 20. That's how it slowly happens. Because now they have different voices in their head. They have an ecosystem of people that every day are working on the same things.
And is that something that can be done online or hybrid, or do you think that has to be always in person, where they basically feel the energy of the other person?
I mean, honestly, I'd say that it's the problem with online is the ease of distraction.
Yeah.
Right. The other side, and you said energy. Energy is really important because when you're in front of other people, you see people working. You see, like if I see someone who's visibly nervous, and I feel the same way, you might inch towards them. You might feel like, okay, that's a safe space for me not to be perfect. I'm going to go hang out with them. We're going to figure it out together. That's going to be my break the habit buddy, or somebody who's super confident. I might just go up to them, and they're like a couple of the entrepreneurs in the program have done that. Come up to one of us, like Aaron, Chuck, and I, and just been like, how do you guys get to where you are in terms of the way you communicate and the way you think? It took time. We weren't born like this either, right? We all have our stories and our traits, and I'm sure as you interview the other guys, people will hear that as well. They might think, oh, these guys just came out this way. No, it didn't. It was a long period of time mastering the craft, mastering ourselves, being okay with failure, being okay with when we're imperfect. Athletes talk about this all the time. There's a rule of thirds. And if you're doing something important, a third of the time you're going to feel like complete shit. A third of the time you're just showing up and going through the motions. And a third of the time you feel like you're really dialed in. So it's okay to feel like you're in one of those 2/3 where you don't feel like you're making progress. As long as you're showing up and giving your best, eventually you get to the other side. It's the people that give up. Those are the only ones that fail. Well, you just made it really dark, but sure, yeah. Die is another way for things to be over, but it still doesn't mean you failed. If you spent the rest of your life doing something you enjoy, trying to build the ecosystem, and seeing that maybe it didn't accomplish exactly what you wanted, but you knew you left tens of thousands of lives better. Sure, technically the program failed. You didn't. Your mission as a person didn't fail. The program didn't evolve the way you wanted. But as a human, you could look back and say, I did everything I possibly could. And I helped thousands of people. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, even if it was further away than I imagined in the beginning. That's not failure, right? You may not be happy that you didn't achieve your dream, but failure would be sitting like on your deathbed and being like, oh, I gave up. What if I would have done this? What if I gave it another year? That's failure.
Yeah. All right. The final system, which I've heard you speak a lot about, which is kind of, in a way, to me, it's geared towards focus, and I would say in a way it's geared towards like sales and marketing, which is one of the most important topics for entrepreneurs, just how to figure out the ideal customer and how to find that customer, market to that customer, and get scale as fast as possible, right? But so many of us get caught up in the distractions of, oh, this is cool, I want to build this, but I want to build this and this and this and this, instead of focusing on the one thing. And one of your principles is called most likely customer direct line of sight, which to me basically means, hey, stop whatever you're thinking, just look at the data and focus on what's most important for your customers if your biggest goal is to scale your business, right? So talk to us about that system, and why do people tend to not be so focused on one thing, but try to do 10 things at once?
Because they haven't found the one thing that works. So there's this idea of like, you think you're being productive because you're doing 10 things, because you haven't found the one thing that works. But instead of like really grinding on the one thing being like market message fit, even before you have product market fit, then it makes you feel productive even when you're not. So the reason I created like most likely customer and direct line of sight is because when you start talking to people about ideal customer profiles and this, if you're just learning everything, when you speak over people, they're like, what? So for me, who's your most likely customer? Everyone kind of understands that. Really basic. it's the same principle as ICP in many ways. But who's your most likely customer? Oh, it's somebody that kind of does this. It also gets them to explain it the way you want to as well. Because when you think of ICPs, people might be like, well, it's this person with this title that works at this company. Yeah, but that's not how you communicate. You're not going to say, hey, VP of this at this company, we have this thing that you should buy. It's not going to work. You got to talk to them about who they are as a person. All day long, what do? They're managing individuals. They're managing engineering builds. They're managing marketing. They're managing HR. What are the things that they've tried? What's failed? What worked and why? What are their biggest pain points? Oh, I've got to spend 20 hours a day dealing with, obviously that's an exaggeration, but I've got to spend all this time dealing with this BS, and then we lose the people in 90 days. That's getting to know the person. So your most likely customer is a human being. It's not an ideal customer profile. It is a human being that has these things they do every single day that they struggle with. And that's how you market to people. Now, the direct line of sight for me is an important part because you have to know how to target them. And I use that too, because sometimes the best way to target someone is not through ads. It's especially when you're just talking to your first 100 customers or trying to get them. Like if you want to market to restaurants, yeah, you can create ads and you can try things online. Just go knock on 100 doors. How much information can you capture and how quickly? Like how detailed the conversation? And when you take that approach, so it removes this idea of like, especially when you talk about technical, people like, I talk to a human. What? Sales? You mean I actually have to go in face to face and talk to a human? Yes. Like that's business. So suck it up. So that for me is most likely customer, really know the human, direct line of sight. How do I reach them? Because if you don't know how to reach them and you don't have a real plan, then it doesn't matter. You may think they're a most likely customer, but you have no idea how to distribute. So if you solve both of those problems, who are they? Not just what's their title, and then how do I get in front of them? At least you have a starting point. And then the other thing we've talked about we haven't really talked about here is the idea of extreme empathy. So many times I was on the call with, well, not on a call, one of the guys who came in the other day. I'm like, pitch me your product. And I'm like, I'm going to cut you off when you tell me things I don't care about. Well, I'm an entrepreneur, don't care. I'm in SERP, don't care. We have this platform, don't care. Like everything is, I'm an entrepreneur from Serbia and we built this platform that works in this way and this hardware and this whatever. And 30 minutes later, all I can think is, I would have hung up on you for 15 seconds in. Because all you're doing is tell me about yourself. It's like, honestly, this may be a new phrase that I use. It's like narcissism in sales. They're not intentionally doing it, but they are not showing any interest whatsoever in the other person. Selling your outcome, the thing that you need, the reason you're talking to me is you want to get 10 hours of your day back. You want to make sure that that person you just spent $50,000 hiring doesn't leave in 90 days. Forget the how, forget who I am, forget any of that. I focus all of my time and energy on you, what you need, the pains and problems you're going through.
Yep. I had this when I was at one of the conferences in San Francisco, and I was speaking with this one guy about how like the differences between like European networking and US networking, whereas in Europe it's all about, hey, who you are, what do you do, and trying to get to know the person. Whereas he was like, yeah, in the US we ask the same questions, right? It's always the question, who are you and what do you do, right? But in their minds, they're always thinking not what do you do, but what can you do for me? How can you make my life easier? Or how can I sell something to you, right? And more transactional and not kind of like looking for ways to waste so much time. And that's why like I think networking is specifically in the US compared to like here in Europe is completely different in that way. And it gets more stuff done, but it doesn't build so much relationships that well. So
here's my question though. Is it really not transactional, or is it just people don't want to be that upfront with how transactional it really is? Because the honest
that as well.
Because here's that's where I'm going with this. Because the reality of it is, if you and I meet and you're like, David can't do anything for me, I'm going to go down here in your list. Not because it doesn't matter how much you like me. There are only so many conversations you can have in a day and a week.
Yeah.
I'm not at the top of your list. So it does not matter. Like this idea that networking should be different. It's like, sure, spend a little time, wash the face. Who are you? What are you about? Like whatever. Versus my approach with everything is, look, I don't want to waste your time or mine. We're both here to accomplish something. Either we can help each other or we can't. And if we can't, sure, we can grab a beer later and maybe we share some great stories. But the reality of it is, if we can't genuinely help each other, like working in the same industry, do something like that, there are only so many emails and text messages or WhatsApp messages we can respond to in a day. So we can put ourselves in the, drink buddy group when you're at a conference. That's just the unfortunate truth of it. And this may be a part of the speed conversation we've had too. Like in the US, when we're trying to build velocity, every communication matters, every delay matters. If that's not the objective here, and velocity isn't the objective, then it's like, sure, I could spend all this time getting to know somebody who's never going to be able to help me.
Yeah, but that's one of the biggest problems with networking is that people don't know how to properly network. In my view, here in well, generally in this region, but also like in Europe, just because of that. I mean, there are several challenges, but one of them is culturally, if you state that the conversation is only transactional, you're viewed as somebody who's transactional, who's not like emotional or friendly or whatever, right? So that's number one. But I'm going to give you an example. One of the investors I spoke to, he said, he asked me a question. He was like, I was at this event where we had 20 startups pitch, right? And they were not like, oh, I have an idea, but like I have an idea, I have executed it, I have some customers. And they were all fundraising, right? And there were like at that event 50 people, out of which 20 founders and maybe 10 more co-founders or people in their team, and 10 investors or less in total. And then everybody else was staff, right? And the investor asked me like, how many startups out of the 20 do you think have approached me after they've pitched and after like we as the investors pitched as well, like who we are and stuff like that. And we were actually at a retreat. So it was like a closed off event in somewhere in the mountains. The whole day is just focused on these investors and startups. And I was like, well, if it's 20 startups, my guess would be at least 10. It's like, no, I only had 2 founders come up to me, and I told them in my pitch when I presented my my fund and stuff like that. I told them, if you want to ask for advice or anything, I'm here. If you want to learn more about our fund, I'm here. Out of the 20, 2 came to me, spoke to me, and they didn't even ask me for any advice. They pitched me, and they were like, when can we? No. They pitched and they were like, when can we talk more about the investment and stuff like that. He was like, yeah, this is just not the culture I'm used to, because that was a local, it was a regional event, but that was in Serbia, and that investor is a foreign investor, right? And he was like, I can't believe that only 2 startups came out to me and spoke to me. And yeah, and so I asked him like, why do you think that is? And he's like, I don't know. I guess they're lazy or whatever. And then I tried to explain the culture, which is, if a founder is with another co-founder and they're at an event, typically they don't want to be rude and not speak with their co-founder who is their friend. So they tend not to do that. They tend not to go away from their like circle of familiarity, right? So that's also one thing. Even though that completely kills the goal. Like the whole reason that they are there is to talk to investors, right? So that's one, and yeah, so many different challenges to networking that we have here, but it's just a thing. People need to break that habit of not exposing themselves and talking to other people who can be the investor or client or whatever.
It's like being transactional, but with some emotional and social intelligence behind it. Because I noticed that too. It's like, the people who are afraid and the people who are like, there's a line in Beautiful Mind where he walks up to the girl at the bar, and this is, brilliant code breaker, etc. Walks up to the girl at the bar and he says, "What do I need to say to you to sleep with you tonight?"
Yeah.
And it's like, that's how aggressive some of the people have been here when they go, like, they either don't sell
Or they oversell.
or they're like, let's get to it. And you're just like, there's somewhere in between, right? When you go to a networking event, it's transactional. You can tell when people are there, they're kind of closed off, whatever. And sometimes it's hard to build relationships. But if you're going to go to a networking event, why are you there if it's not to meet people? This idea that you're sticking in your comfort zone, or you don't want to talk to someone, or you don't know how to pitch, and there's no patience of just like, are we going to do the deal? It's not the way it works, right? It's like they're trying to close and just say, would you like to get married to me? I've had a couple of people send me a message. A guy I actually met in a hotel the other day and sends me a message like, hey, can you make it? Didn't really want to tell me what he's doing. And I liked him. But his message says, nice to meet you. Can you make introductions to this fund, that fund, this fund, blah, blah. And I just laughed. I'm like, well, you are communicating like a 5-year-old with zero like emotional and social intelligence. Like, no, I don't know you. And you've given me nothing. I'm not just going to say like, hey, here's somebody. Like, meet this person. Like, play. And this is the response I'm going to give them. I want to play out this conversation for you. Hey, so-and-so, it's been a while since we talked. I wanted to share this company with you. I thought you might be interested. I don't know anything about them. I've never worked with them. I have no idea what they do. You think they're ever going to open it? Like, first of all, if we know each other well enough, they're going to respond and say, you're an idiot. Don't ever mess with me with this nonsense again. If we don't, and we're not like close friends, they're just never going to respond to me again. Just complete lack of, and this guy actually isn't from here. He's visiting, but he's from somewhere else. You would think like Western Europe. So the reality is there's no excuse. Like, people have to start working on themselves and understand how to communicate in different settings, how to be transactional without being like, what do I need to say to you for you to sleep with me tonight? Because that's just not going to work. So there has to be a balance. This is where like learning empathy, learning emotional and social intelligence, as much as in certain circles, people will say, oh, it's an exaggeration. 99% of it's still communication. 99% of the world is still communication. Your ad, your email, your marketing, what you say on your website, how you approach somebody at a networking event, it's all the same thing. It's all communications. So to have that be the skill where you're weakest, and you can't trust AI because AI communicates like a computer. So if you're not selling to another computer, then forget it.
Yep. Completely agree. I want to ask you about your productivity hacks. You mentioned to me a couple of times that you have your own system for waking up early, doing, I would say, time crunches throughout the day to get 12, 14, 16 hours of like quality work during that one day. How does that look like? And how do you sustain that and not get burned out?
Well, sustaining it really, and it wasn't even a study, so it may not be true, or may not be fully true, but they just talked about the negative impacts on health and life expectancy. And they talk about movement, diet, and stress. Movement and diet, obviously, stress is the biggest one. So it's like coordinating your day so you never feel like you're overly stressed. You don't have 10,000 things waiting for you. You don't have 5,000 decisions. Like, you set yourself up for success by the day before, like, here's my schedule for the next day. So I'm going to get up at, and I give myself flexibility. If sometimes I'm up because I can't sleep and I'm up at 4:00 in the morning. Okay, I'll just get up. If I'm up, I'm just going to get up. And then I'll like build in a bigger rest inside the middle of the day because I know I'm going to crash if I only got like 5 hours of sleep instead of 7. Otherwise, I get up sometime between 5 and 6. I let my body decide. I don't set alarms because for me personally, when I know there's alarm, the alarm stresses me out. And it's like, I don't sleep well. So no alarms. I get up. My first hour of the day is just like deep thought work on the most important thing. Then I've got another hour where I go and walk. I'll go to the gym, I'll get on a treadmill, and I will just walk for an hour. Slow pace, because if you're walking too quickly, that's too much. But like slow pace, I could be transcribing, even though half of the time, it's like maybe I've had too much peanut butter. It just doesn't understand what the heck I'm saying. So the talk to text doesn't really work that well. But I just spend the next hour getting other like content creation, whatever else it is that I can do on my phone versus on a computer. So I'm moving, etc. Then I give myself the next 15 to 20 minutes outside, away from everything. No noise, just let myself digest the first 2 hours of the day. The things that I did, how does it adjust the rest of my day? Do I need a little bit more time on any one of those things? Then I'll go back and I'll start to do work that isn't as much deep thought, because your mind is like any other muscle. Like now it's just grind out some work, respond, get some creative work done where it's just sort of moving something from here to there, creating like a video campaign or whatever else it is. Like I'm being productive, but I'm not deep thought working my mind for that period of time. I'll do that for a period of whatever I need for the day, depending on my schedule. If I have other calls, I build in 2 quick like meditation breaks throughout the day, 15 to 20 minutes, aside from the one I talked about in the morning. And then just eating healthy. The most important thing is eating healthy food throughout the day so you never feel bloated. So never eating too much, never eating like things that are really heavy, which is why I don't do like lots of carbs or fats or sugars or anything, because it just makes you feel terrible. Instead of having natural energy throughout the day, you just feel terrible. Then what do you do when you feel terrible, but you have work to do? You start to like energy drinks or over caffeinate. No, I don't go to sleep. It's like you put pressure on yourself of like over caffeinate, energy drinks, whatever else it is, and then it just gets worse. So much of it is just the little bits of discipline help so much. Going to bed at a certain time, putting your plan together the night before, not trying to put 1,000 things on your calendar, having little breaks that you build in throughout the day, making sure you've got like your hydration and your diet scheduled. Because the way you don't burn out is you don't try to run an ultra marathon like you're running a sprint. Like if what I'm building is something that's long term, and I know I need to build in 70, 80 hours of work per week consistently, then I do that. The other thing is when I show up and it's one of those 1/3 days where it's just complete shit, I give myself a break. I don't work that much, right? I get what needs to get done. I make sure no one's waiting on me. And what ends up happening is I'll go to the gym. I won't do any deep thought work in the morning. I'll take a break. I'll allow myself to disconnect, which I typically build in, but sometimes we just need them more often. And then the other thing is I build in things for me that are personally enjoyable, right? So I'll like go to a theater, whether it's a play or a documentary. There aren't that many good, purely entertaining movies, in my opinion, anymore. So that for me is just, it's pleasant, right? It's like, I can't think of a better date night than me with a big thing of popcorn about to see a good movie on a Friday night. And now those are the things to reset as well. You need the things you enjoy. You need the things to reset, whatever it might be. Because at a certain point, the gym isn't resetting. It's making you happy and healthy. Like you feel better after a workout, but you need things that bring you some joy. So it's really building all those things in and finding what works for you. So that's part of it. You got your big vision. You know it's not a sprint. And then you just build in the little things that you personally need throughout the day so you don't feel like you're constantly out of breath.
All right. Final question before we get to quick and short questions at the end. What are you working on now? And what's your vision with Break the Wheel company that you're running?
So Break the Wheel came from Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And it's that scene where she's talking to Tyrion.
Daenerys.
Yeah. And basically it's this conversation around, he says to her, she talks about the wheel that's been rolling over people. He said, yeah, it's a good idea to think that you're going to stop the wheel. It's like, I'm not going to stop it. I'm going to break it. And the industries I've worked in over time, I noticed the industries are so broken. They're so screwed up. People don't even know really how to invest in them anymore. Like healthcare in the US is just a nightmare. As an example, finance. And there are actually some interesting companies finally coming online in finance. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what I'm working on because I'm keeping it stealth until we go live, mainly because the biggest advantage we have is that by the time people realize they're in a race with us, we're already 5 legs ahead of them. Like at this point, that's really all you have is how much further you are in terms of your product, your returns, whatever else it is. But Break the Wheel is taking on individuals building wealth And there are a range of activities that we have or products that we'll be launching over the next year, specifically in that space, because working in healthcare, one of the things that we realized is if you're broke and you're worried about paying the bills next month, do you really think you care if you have diabetes? Are you worried about being 30 pounds overweight when the rest of your life is complete shit? No. So how do you change, like generationally change people's lives? So when I think about like the place I've lived in, the thing that I actually love about New York, maybe not everyone does, is in most neighborhoods in New York, you're never more than a few blocks away from low income housing, which means you never forget how the other side lives, right? And for me, that's really important to always remember it. Like the other side was always the place I felt more comfortable. I didn't live in projects, but that's always the place I felt more comfortable with. The people were just like, you know, here you go, the Italian things, hands, I'm gonna start knocking things off the table. It's thinking like, it's a reminder for me of these are the people that I'm working for. These are the things I'm building for, because I want them to be able to make enough money with what little they have now. So within a couple of years, they're at a point where they can do more than just pay the bills, or even if they're on government assistance, they have a little bit of money to invest in something else, to think about buying an apartment, moving to a better neighborhood. Because as soon as that happens, that's generational. So instead of you being in government housing, you being in poverty, you feeling like there's no way out, and your kids saying the same thing and them feeling like my ceiling is so low. Hey, mom or dad has started doing some investing. They're learning about, starting a business. It changes the conversations in the home. They own real estate instead of always being in the situations that they're in. So for me, it's mostly around income and finance and a range of activities there that still need to be fixed. And there's some people doing a great job and sort of nipping around the edges too in that space. And that's the goal with Break the Wheels. Like one by one, take the things that the organizations, whether it be government or private, are not doing the way they should, or not doing in a way that serves our best interests, and finding ways through that we as a population. It's the idea of like 1 to N. If you can get one person to do it and then multiply that over tens of millions of people, imagine the impact you can have on society, on voting, on the climate, on education, on healthcare, whatever else it is, when you're able to really solve the problem for one person, and then you're able to scale that to millions and tens of millions. Big goals, but I can't imagine spending the rest of my life any other way.
Sure. And you've kind of gave us a pretty good story about your life, whereas when you were you had your childhood and all throughout your years, you have this want to basically help people who are in those, let's say, in the normal families and who are somewhat struggling, but you see a way through to help them, and that's kind of that thing has guided you to create Break the Wheel. It's also guided you to work with entrepreneurs at different programs and help them to help them to succeed, right?
Yeah, man, I think that part of the reason I'm so aggressive when I see someone that needs help, and my mother told me this once, is that she was told she has a savior complex, because she's one of the like kindest, most positive people you ever meet. No matter what's going on, she's just so giving and always concerned about other people's feelings. That is very much nurture. So much of who I am, extreme empathy, wanting to help others. That's who she is at her core, right? Witnessed that early. And that's me. Like I have a hard time watching someone putting their hand on the stove, right? In all situations and scenarios. And oh yeah, that's something I need to fix, because it can make me a pain in the ass. It's a well-intended pain in the ass, but it's still a pain in the ass. But it's like in some ways I have that as well. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like people see themselves, everyone sees themselves in their own way. I would say if I was to say manifesting the future me, it's, in everything I'm doing, it's like a real world superhero is what I want to be. Not because I want a cape, not really my style, or I want to walk around in tights, again, also not really my style. I'd love to be able to fly, but more because it's like the idea of just, if you can spend your entire life helping other people, like genuinely helping other people, changing lives for generations. I know this isn't everyone's thing, and I'm not judging anyone who doesn't. There are plenty of people who are just extremely capitalistic and for themselves because of what they went through. Like they were in extreme poverty. They didn't have heat or food or whatever else. Like I don't judge anyone for their path, but this for me is mine.
Amazing. Have a couple of really quick questions for the end. What is something that you believe to be true that others don't agree with you, or that others don't believe, or that you think that they don't believe?
You know, I probably would have given you a different answer 2 weeks ago. The thing that and I've said this to you a few times over the last couple of weeks, like, how do I teach people and transfer critical thinking and problem solving, the ability to spot the signals and patterns? Because what I believe to be true, and I've said this to you before. So Aaron has said this because Aaron's brilliant, and his wife has said to him, like, sometimes you're the only one in the room who understands what you're saying. And I feel like many times I'm the only one in the room who understands the dots I'm connecting or who is able to. And in some ways that feels really arrogant. I just feel like that person hasn't been exposed. They don't have the same capability. They're probably smarter than I am. They just haven't had the same access, the same exposure, the same ecosystem. So for me, it's mostly less about what I believe to be true that others don't agree with, and more about how do I find a way to transfer what I've been taught. Because the reality of it is, I think for the most part, and this is probably like, I could find someone who agrees with any one of my opinions, whether it's politics, healthcare, whatever else. Anyone who's forward thinking is probably going to say, I agree with this part, but not that part. And I enjoy those conversations, constructive confrontation around important topics. But for me, it's more a matter of, if anything, with the first trip, more this trip than the first one, because the first one, we didn't have as much time to digest. It's like, how do you get people to retrain the way they think where they're not exposed to it every day? I was exposed to it every day in San Francisco, and it accelerated a path I was already on in a way I can't even describe. And I'm grateful for the people that were part of that journey. So how do you do that for other people who aren't exposed to it every day? That's the big question I have now, and then I'll take away from this trip, is how to create an ecosystem when you're 10,000 miles away from the one that you really need to be a part of.
It's a tough question.
Yeah, well, it's the one to work towards, right? It's what it's part of what you're trying to do.
Yeah. That's kind of something we're trying to do with ScaleSC, with this podcast, with creating this community, with bringing US operators here, with the logic of trying to help entrepreneurs go there physically as well. So yeah, it's a tough question, and it's a question, and it's a problem and challenge that I have faced myself as well. I've been fortunate to live abroad. I've been fortunate to be in the United States for roughly around 2 months without going back to Serbia, and then when I came back, you kind of regress in a way to the same mindset that's kind of here, and like you are most likely the person who is the same or similar to the other 5 people that you are mostly in communication with, and that can sometimes be problematic.
Yeah, because what do? You either come back here and the people don't recognize you anymore.
Yep.
And you're like, oh, well, you think you're better than us and smarter, or whatever else might come from it, even though that's not the intention. Or you fall back. Sometimes what it means is you need new friends. Sometimes what it means is you need to find the people that are fighting the same battle you are for yourself. And you need to be okay letting the friends you had go, knowing that there'll always be people you'll be there for. They'll be your family, right? There's a period in life where your friends are your family. And I steal that from the show Friends. I watched the documentary on how it was created, which is pretty brilliant, which is why it worked. There's that period of time, but then you have to accept that for you to move forward, you're not on the same page with all of your family members, right? Like you're not all headed in the same direction, but you're still family. And the friends that are your family now can always be your family, but they don't need to be your circle.
Yep. I can agree. All right. One other question. What is the one thing that you very much dislike about the Balkan culture? Because you've been here twice now. First time was a week. Now it's more like 2.5 to 3 weeks. What do you dislike most about the culture, and what are some things that you really like about our culture and the entrepreneurs here that you would want to continue supporting us?
I'm definitely going to end with the positive.
That's why I asked the positive.
The follow-up. The negative side, honestly, I don't dislike. I have had no bad, other than the fact that you and I have talked about the hospitality industry, and it's just terrible. And terrible in the sense of like, I'll stand there and look at two guys who are just chatting and they're just like, we don't want your business. We don't care. What's wrong with you? I'm not upset about it. Like, you're not doing anything wrong. You just really aren't great at your job. And I wouldn't say I dislike that. I don't dislike anything about the culture, because that for me is a negative. And what I say is what needs to be fixed.
Or what you disagree with.
Okay, so what I disagree with and what needs to be fixed is that what concerns me is that some of the younger generation who are active, if they watch this, they'll know I'm talking about them. I really like them, right? I'm not going to say their names, but I like them because they're just trying to find their way and help build the ecosystem and help companies raise money. Like, I have nothing negative to say about them as people or as operators, because they're doing the best they can. What I disagree with is that they're coming to the table with the same terms that are just going to make it harder for them and everybody else. They're thinking about deal terms and structures that, looking 20 years backwards, looking 15 years backwards. So the thing that I disagree with, and the thing that needs to be said, and maybe I'm the bad cop that needs to say it, is this region. I can't speak for the entire region, my experience here. The businesses don't move forward if the people who are here that are supposed to be supporting the businesses don't stop feeding on them like a parasite. Even if it's not their intention. Intention doesn't matter, right? Like, hey, Dave, I'm sorry I called you fat. You still called me fat. Like, I know you didn't mean to hurt my feelings or whatever. It's like, whatever that, everyone's heard that bad analogy, but everyone's heard that example of, I didn't mean to hurt you, but you still did, right? I didn't mean to do this. It wasn't intentional. I get it. But the intent doesn't matter. At a certain point, what matters is thinking further out and say, am I trying to be part of an ecosystem that scales, right? Like we talked about this, that you have companies that are putting terms in place where as soon as you go to the US, they're going to walk away from you because it's just a mess of paperwork, and you've got basically hostage clauses in there that make it impossible to work with you. And it unfortunately reflects badly on the entrepreneur as well, because an investor might say, well, you don't know what the hell you're doing if you sign this, which is not true. They're good operators. They're good engineers. They're good salespeople. Like, they're building interesting products. It's just this thing that they've been taught is okay is not. So the thing that I disagree with is allowing the next wave of operators, allowing things to continue as is, and not forcing the market to catch up by saying no. And I know that's hard when you're like, we're struggling for money, but the reality, we being like, I'm a startup, I need to pay my bills, I need to pay my people, I need to take the next step. This is something I put on you to say, you need to give them a different path. Otherwise, you never get out of where you are. You're just always going to be stuck in the mud. Because as long as companies put themselves in a situation where they can't make that transition, they won't. The other thing is speed. So the two operational things that need to be fixed is deal terms, like access to capital and the right capital, and then speed. The idea that, we're afraid of failure, or we can't fail. We're taught that we better know what's going to happen and that it won't fail before we take the next step. I can understand it. Whether I can relate to it or not doesn't matter. The problem is, if you had like a restaurant and you're the only restaurant in town, move as slow as you'd like. You're competing with companies all over the world, software. You can't operate at whatever pace you want, because the glacial pace you're moving at, the people you're competing with, They're raising money, hiring people, closing deals 10 times faster than you. You're destined to fail. So just close it now. That is failure. But you're failing in the business because you're unwilling to move beyond your comfort zone or incapable. Sometimes it's paralyzing where someone's like, I can't move faster. I'm not comfortable. I get it. Let your first startup be your failure, but you learn it for your next one. Okay, I have to move faster. I wasn't wrong about product. I wasn't wrong about market. I got some of my marketing right, but I was moving so slow that everyone else flew by me. So in terms of the good, I'll go back to what I think I said earlier, which is what I really liked about the entrepreneurs here is they were just so happy to have access to something that felt like somebody believes in me the way I believe in me. Somebody is giving me the advice I've always felt like I needed, the access I've always felt like I needed. It's like they wish, and I listen, I know, and I've said this to you. Look, I'm not Reid Hoffman. I'm not Elon Musk. I'm not Mark Andreessen. I'm not Brian Chesky. I'm not I am not these people, right? And they would have such a bigger impact than I would because of who they are and what they've accomplished and the insights that they would have that go beyond the insights that I have. And I have no ego in that. Like it's the truth of it. But it's like they're so desperate for an ecosystem that supports them in the way that they want to be supported. It's hard to describe how much their gratitude comes through. That's the thing I like the most. You have people who are trying to break the chain, so to speak, break the wheel, whatever you want to call it, not to whatever, but it's like, I don't want to operate the same way. And it's difficult because of the political and economic transition the country has made over the last 20 years. But that for me is what I like the most and what's positive. The other thing that I like is, and I know some of it's because, the financial system but the idea that it almost operates the way immigrant communities in the US operated 100 years ago. Pay me tomorrow. Take care of me later. Like, it's just, as much as sometimes the service is shit, there's, just because the people probably shouldn't have that job. You'd be like, if you don't know how to be nice and smile, you probably shouldn't have it. But it has a little bit like a little of the old world feel to it, which is what I always enjoy when I travel. It makes me feel a little bit like when I was growing up and people were just, like here, and I think about traveling in Turkey and different places, you just get treated differently. It's just a level of kindness and gratitude to have your attention, to have your business, to have whatever else. That's what I appreciate most. And that's why I've said to you, like, I don't care. I'll give time to be part of the process for as long as it takes. How much time, obviously, I can't put in X amount of time for 20 years. But if you're committed to this for 20 years and to the people in the community, I'll give time every week. As long as people are always showing up with the desire to improve themselves, better their lives, and figure things out, they can show up every week for the next 15 years because as long as they don't give up, they haven't failed.
If you're a startup founder from the Balkans, you'll eventually need a US company. To sell into the US market, use Stripe, or raise VC money. But here's the problem. US lawyers charge between $600 and $1,000 an hour. Opening a bank account as a non-resident is a nightmare. You need a US phone number, operating address, and there are a lot of hidden costs plus lawyer lingo you can't understand. This is why we have partnered with Neubase. They are a team of Balkan founders who have been exactly where you are. They're 10 times cheaper than US lawyers, and they handle everything end to end, from the corporation, bank account setup, tax filings, and basically leaving you to focus on your own business. Head to neubase.co, book a free consultation, and mention Scale SE to get 10% discount off your LLC or C-Corp setup.